I'll be honest with you, all this talk of lockdown has got me feeling, well, a little bit reminiscent if I'm honest. Thinking back to those carefree times where me and the watermelon, like pro reviewers, could play with, well, pretty much any camera we wanted. And we're just gonna walk and talk, the lighting's gonna change. Or back to when we could roam freely through the Cornish countryside, capturing all of nature's beauty.
Right,
I want to go now.
okay, on to the next one.
Even thinking about the studios got me a little bit sad, thinking about that huge, luxurious amount of space that we used to have in order to be truly creative within it. I mean, I'm not complaining, I am pretty lucky, that's for sure, but I am stuck in the corner of my bedroom. So when we packed up to come and work at home, I obviously grabbed just essentials, the things I couldn't be without. So interestingly, once the panic had passed and I came to unpack, I noticed that I had packed just 3 cameras. You can never have too many cameras. The 3 cameras that for me are quite possibly my favourite of all time. Now, these 3 cameras aren't the pedigree best. This isn't going to be a specs war. This is just the 3 cameras that in all the time and gear that we've used, I couldn't be without during the lockdown. And almost in total contradiction to everything I've just said, this first camera, well, it's probably the best camera on paper that you can get right now, especially in this form factor. It is right up there with, well, miniaturized cinema cameras. It is quite simply the best camera I've ever used. That's right, this is the Panasonic S1H. So, full disclosure time, this isn't actually our camera. Panasonic have sent this one to us to test out a new feature that's about to be released, one that I'm not allowed to talk about yet. I'm pretty sure actually the NDA mentions something about execution. Anyway, it is the second time that Panasonic have sent us the S1H, and like the first time, this camera has totally blown me away in what it can actually do. Now, we all know the specs of the S1H by now. 6K, full frame mirrorless, Netflix approved, and more dynamic range than an orchestra. Yes, on paper, this camera is incredibly impressive. But for me, what's more impressive is how well this matches up to the specs when you actually use the camera, and that isn't always the case with flagship cameras. Now, if I was going to advise anyone to invest in any camera system to last them for at least, well, the next 5 years, then the Panasonic S1H would be my recommendation. And that's incredibly hard for me to say when I consider how much EF glass I own. Next up in my top 3 cameras of the lockdown is a camera that I've used the most. A camera that, well, I believe is probably one of the most underrated cameras of all time, especially in the YouTube space. It is in fact the camera I'm filming this very video with, and that is the Canon XC10. Sitting somewhere in between a 1DX and a Canon C range, this miniaturized Cinecam is a wonderful, powerful little workhorse. We've owned 2 for the longest time really, and they go with us on every shoot we do, regardless of the location. They're just that versatile. It can shoot up to 4K onto CF Express cards, or a really decent 1080p onto UHS-1 SD cards. For me, there's something really magical about this 5-year-old camera, something that's been overlooked by, well, pretty much everyone. It is, yes, a hybrid stills and photo camera, but there's an important caveat to that. This is a video first hybrid. Now, that is a really important point because everything about that, all the features they've put into this camera are for the video shooter first. This isn't a video as an afterthought camera like pretty much every DSLR and mirrorless camera on the market. It's got internal in-body stabilization, Canon's dual pixel autofocus technology, built-in ND filters, awesome video profiles and codecs, and an incredible 24 to 240mm variable aperture lens. It is essentially all the best features of a Canon C100 shrunk into a tiny little handheld body. I still don't understand why more video shooters, YouTubers, or vloggers for that matter, didn't pick up on the Canon XC range. Maybe it's a fashion thing. For sure, this camera isn't in the Peter McKinnon school of cool. This is more substance over style. But that practicality, that usability, and the quality that it puts out will, well, it'll beat any DSLR of an equivalent price point that you could throw at it. The third and final on this list of cameras that I've packed for the lockdown has actually no business being mentioned in 2020 whatsoever. It only shoots in 1080p, uses a micro 4/3 lens mount, which I personally hate. It has a battery life probably the same size as a wind-up car, but is still a camera that I truly love. That's right, it is the original Blackmagic pocket cinema camera. You know, back when they could actually fit in your pocket. Now, I know this makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. It has no practical value to me taking it, but when the lockdown was announced and I started packing up the studio, this was one of the first cameras that I actually reached for. For me, it has such an important place in video making history, and in particular in my journey, that I couldn't be with it. And I'm willing to argue that it still has a place today in 2020. To save you guys the pain of hearing me drone on and on about why I love this camera so much and all the reasons why I think it is still relevant, let's just skip to the end. It's the sensor. The Super 16 sensor in this camera is magical in the picture that it can deliver for you. It's truly film-like. Now, whenever you hear any YouTubers or video creators on this space talk about cinematic, I believe this is actually what they're talking about. It's the quality of an image that you get from something like a Super 16 sensor. And if I'm honest, I've never really given this camera the time or spotlight that it deserves. But that's because it's a royal pain in the ass to use. There's no in-body image stabilization or continuous autofocus. The crop factor on the thing is absolutely ridiculous. There's no ND filtering internally, which for a video camera doesn't make any sense whatsoever. The ProRes 1080p video files that you get out of it are so big that it's just ridiculous for 1080p. There's just hurdles everywhere to using this camera. But when you do use it and you see the footage that comes out with it, it just genuinely fills you with joy in how it looks. And for that, it's like the S1H in many ways. It's a camera that actually just inspires you to do a little more. It is a look and a feel that does something to me on an irrational level. So yes, it is a 6-year-old camera and it does only shoot in 1080p. And yes, it is incredibly annoying to use, but for some emotional, irrational reasons, the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera is quite possibly my favorite camera of all time. So that's been my grab and go review lockdown style. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.